Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for the webinar How to Secure SoftPOS Mobile Apps to Comply with PCI MPoC. I'm Davide Alefrate, Product Marketing Manager at Guardsquare, and today I'll be moderating the webinar. We are joined today by a team of experts from Guardsquare and Riscure, Anton Baranenko, Product Manager at Guardsquare, and Arno Boyten, Senior Evaluator at Riscure. Before we start, let me share a couple of housekeeping rules. You can submit your question in the Q&A box located in the Zoom control panel at the bottom of your screen. We will answer your questions in a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. For your information, this webinar is recorded and will be available on demand afterwards. So let's start with the first speaker, Anton.
Hello, everyone. Nice to see you and welcome to this webinar. Nice to see the familiar names, but also some new names as well. Many new names actually today. We are going to talk today about MPoC mainly, and about what it means, which systems it is designed for, some interesting facts and highlights from MPoC requirements. And finally, the most interesting, I think, for you is how to succeed at MPoC certification and how not to fail. So without any further ado, let's jump in and talk about SoftPOS systems and how PCI MPoC applies to them. So first of all, what is a SoftPOS system? There are two types that I think we want to talk about today. One type is something that's called MPoC system. That is a system that consists of a specialized hardware and software that runs on off-the-shelf mobile device. And in pure SoftPOS systems, the off-the-shelf mobile device is handling everything, including PIN entry, card NFC, chip scanning, and the software that actually does the same. So in the past, you know that MPoC systems were handled by PCI SPoC, while pure SoftPOS were handled by PCI CPoC. Today, both types of systems are handled by PCI MPoC. So that's one aspect of MPoC, that it aggregates both systems, but it's not by far the most interesting part. So is MPoC, PCI MPoC and consolidation? No, it's much more than that. It's an evolution. So let's find out why. I'm going to start with the stakeholders who participate in digital payments. So not only solution providers, not only the developers who actually make the whole thing, who make the full application and the SDK and the code, but you can participate now with MPoC in different roles in contrast to the prior standards. You can participate as MPoC software development. You can be making application, you can be making a payment SDK, you can make attestation and monitoring systems, you can make the entire solution. And MPoC is made modular to accommodate the interest of all those roles. And depending on what your role is, different parts of PCI MPoC are going to apply to you. Core requirements apply to everyone, and then different requirements are going to apply to you depending on your role. So it is easier, it is more logical to certify and to participate in this mobile digital payments in various roles. The second aspect of MPoC, which I wanted to talk to you about today as well, is how it treats the off-the-shelf devices. So the key assumption of MPoC security model is that off-the-shelf devices are unknown and untrusted. We are going to talk a little bit about this, a little more about this in subsequent slides, but it is important to understand that it is an off-the-shelf device. It can be fully controlled by a malicious party, by an attacker. It is assumed that the attacker has full access and can execute anything on the platform. So the protection that you have to implement does not have to rely on the fact that that you can always control that the device is not rooted or similar assumptions that you make. A very important aspect of MPoC, which was not present in the prior standards, is its extremely practical aspect. And that manifests itself in several requirements that introduces scoring framework. What does it mean? It means that any attack that is going to be executed, and by the way, that's something that Arno will tell you more about, that during certification tests, your application or your solution, your SDK, is going to be attacked. So practical scenarios are going to be executed. It is not enough to just tick the boxes and fulfill the requirements. No, practical attacks are going to be performed. And depending on what the attack is, you are going to get points. For attack time, obviously, like the more time it took the lab to execute the attack or to prepare to design the attack, the more points you are going to get because you are going to delay the attacker. The same is for expertise. The same is for scalability. We're going to talk about scalability and so on. So depending on all these factors, you're going to score points. And finally, you are going to succeed if you will score 25 or more points on a particular attack. So the key takeaway from this section is that it is not enough for you to follow the requirements and to just execute them one by one and seeing, okay, we have implemented this, we have implemented that, and so on. The application or the SDK has to sustain real attacks on real devices that will be controlled by the attacker completely, and you will have to score points on the practical scale in order to get certified. Those are a few things, a few highlights. Let's talk a little bit about threats to understand more what it means, why those requirements are actually created. So as we discussed, smartphones cannot be trusted. When we are talking about commercial off-the-shelf device, in most cases, we mean a smartphone. Compared to a specialized card reader device, a specialized hardware that was manufactured also with physical tampering in mind, it is manufactured in such a way that it can execute only one particular program. Smartphones are general purpose devices. You can do a lot with a smartphone. You can install a lot of different applications, not only the merchant app, not only the SoftPOS app. They are programmable, they are easy to tweak, they are easy to tamper with, both in terms of software and in terms of hardware sometimes as well. So there is a lot more going on in the smartphone world. And in particular, for the first time, both PIN and the account data happen to be at the same time on the same device. This means that the attacker potentially has all the data to execute a valid financial transaction. They have the PIN code, they have the account number, so they can go ahead and execute something that you don't want to happen, a fraudulent transaction. So this means that the measures to defend those SoftPOS applications have to be very strict, and the standard makes sure of that. What can happen exactly? So the attacks practically, and most common attacks, are going to focus on two aspects. First is the network and the data that you send and receive. In particular, the attacker would seek to obtain a man-in-the-middle position in the attack because that allows them to control the traffic. So you definitely have to keep that in mind. And also all kinds of attacks that occur on the end device. This includes fake applications, so completely different application that imitates the merchant's app. It could include tempered clones. So the valid merchants app that was cloned and repackaged with additional functionality included that leads to a fraud, and also malware that if that happens to be installed on the merchant's phone, and as we discussed, that's a general purpose device, so malware can perfectly end up on that device. That can also be used to execute illegal transactions on the SoftPOS system. So this is the main attack landscape that happens on SoftPOS devices.
Okay, so let's make this webinar a bit more interactive. We are going to run a poll, and you will see pretty soon the question on your screen. Please select the options that apply to you. Think that we can stop the poll. Our vote still coming? Vote still coming? Okay. Okay, let's see the results. Okay, interesting. I see that the attendees are spread and there are quite different POS solutions used at the moment. So this webinar is definitely very relevant for you. And let's continue.
I don't think the attendees can see the poll results, so it would be interesting to comment. Indeed, they are spread more or less evenly. That is interesting. I'm wondering if you guys, especially the ones of you who answered that you don't have a SoftPOS system, can you please send us a short comment with your expectations, what you want to ask about, or maybe why did you decide to join the webinar, or what information will be the most valuable to you. And meanwhile, let's continue and let's talk about a few highlights that are important. And we are going to focus here on MPoC domain 1, the core requirements for the MPoC software. So as you can see in this slide that the core domain is quite large. A lot of requirements are here, and this applies, as I was saying, to everyone. So whether you're making an application, or whether you're making an SDK, or you're making a different solution, an attestation solution, perhaps those requirements apply to you. So this is already a lot, but among those requirements, there are a few things, a few essential principles that you have to work with. And 3 of those I want to talk about today in more detail. The first one is sensitive assets. This is requirement 1B12. And it prescribes you to identify sensitive assets in your solution. What's interesting about this is that you have to identify it for your own solution, for your own program. So there are no generic lists in the standard that tell you, okay, you need to protect this and that and that and that. You have to do a proper security analysis, proper threat analysis before you make a conclusion. And it is expected that you, the application developer, would identify those things. What those security assets, sensitive assets might be. They might fall into one of the 3 categories. It could be your data, for example, your key material, the keys that you're using to sign transactions on the client side, or the keys that you're using to verify the signature that comes from the server side, any sort of key material, any sort of attestation data can be included in your sensitive assets. This also is about the user data, so not about the data that comes from you as the developer, but from about the data that comes from the user who operates your solution. And those can be PIN codes, this can be account data, the data that we talked about just recently that is needed to execute the transaction. And this can be code as well. So any algorithms that you use to execute your payment logic are sensitive assets that have to be protected. So the most important, the takeaway here is that you define them and there are no generic lists, so you have to apply your risk modeling to satisfy this requirement. The second part, which is also very important, and it's sort of like a foundational requirement that really defines how well you are going to execute on your other requirements, it's a secure life cycle. It may seem unusual, right, that the requirement is not about the end result, not about the SDK, but about how you make it. But it is extremely important to make sure that you have the solid foundation, the solid processes that enable you to not only deliver a secure solution now, but deliver it continuously throughout the development of the product. So at your security lifecycle should start on the very early stages. So starting already from the requirements, from the initial design of the product, and going all the way until deployment and monitoring of your secure solution in production. You have to implement security and learn. So not only you implement different security measures, but you make sure that those feedback loops exist, that anything that you have learned at the later stages of your life cycle, something that you learn during protection or during security testing or during already the execution of the application in the field, is being fed back into your earlier stages so that you learn, make conclusions, and continuously improve. And PCI allows you to either implement a life cycle from PCI, or you can implement your own. And there are requirements basically to make sure that your life cycle is secure and that it guarantees a secure outcome. So continuous secure life cycle is important, is a foundation to implementing your software. It is important to learn it. And the last thing that I wanted to highlight today is the scalability. So in front of you, you can see a scoring table from PCI MPoC. And this assigns different scores, different score values to different aspects of the attack. As we discussed, attack duration and attack expertise and all of those things matter and enable you to score points. But you can see that the larger amount of points, 12 points, you can score for attack scalability, or rather for attack not being scalable. This is important because, well, first of all, right, it's just the largest amount of points that you can get, or the largest amount of points that you can lose if your attack if your defense does not fulfill that requirement, if the attack turns out to be scalable, extremely scalable. So that also reflects the importance of this aspect that PCI assigns to this particular parameter. So remember that if you apply generic solutions, if you apply one-click solutions, those can also lead to one-click hacks, extremely scalable attacks, and you're not going to get 12 points. And if you lose 12 points, it's going to be extremely difficult to get to 25. So it is important to apply solutions which are which are polymorphic, which are tailored individually to your product, as opposed to some generic well-known measures. So with this information, I will give the word to Arno, who will tell you about everything about certifying. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Anton. Yes, so my name is Arno, and working for Riscure. Riscure is one of the certified MPoC labs, and so we are quite involved in the certification process, of course. Basically, this process is really simple. So as an MPoC vendor, software vendor, solution provider, you need to contact an MPoC lab, and this MPoC lab will do an evaluation. We will write a report, send it to PCI, and PCI is basically saying yes or no. And in general, they say yes, but it might take some time because there will be some back and forth, there will be questions. So we will, as a lab, also be challenged basically by PCI. So, but that's basically the process. So it's 3 parties. It's very straightforward. But as Anton also already highlighted a bit, MPoC is really, it's deep and it's wide. So there's a lot to do. So to prepare you as an MPoC vendor for this kind of evaluations, we also developed a workshop from Riscure, which takes 4 hours. So you can kind of imagine that during this webinar, it's really scratching the surface, I would say, because there's a lot to talk about. We also offer a readiness assessment, a kind of pre-scan based on documentation only, just to give you an idea of where you're going in the certification process. Like I said, oh, it's interesting. Dario, can you? Yes, please. So MPoC is broad, and it also includes quite some references to other PCI standards. And Anton already mentioned SLC, so the Secure Software Lifecycle, which is an important aspect. And there is one requirement actually in MPoC that says that you need to go through an SLC evaluation. It doesn't mean that you need to be listed as an SLC company on the PCI website, but it's needed to go through the evaluation needs to be done on the SLC requirements. And that can be done within the context of an MPoC evaluation. The same applies to the software itself. So MPoC software consists of an MPoC application or an SDK, but it consists also of software running on the backend. And that needs to be compliant with the secure software standard from PCI. So basically, those are just 2 requirements in MPoC that basically say, well, go through an evaluation of 2 different whole standards. So you can imagine MPoC requires a lot of preparation and a lot of time also. Like Anton said, so MPoC is modular, so it has a lot of options that are supported. So one of them is additional card readers that were required in SPoC, but in MPoC, which more or less integrates the previous standards, SPoC and CPoC, it's an optional item to have secure card reader pins. But if you have them, they need to comply with the PCI PTS standard. That's not something we as Riscure check because we are an MPoC-certified lab, but you need to choose card readers that are PCI PTS certified. Most important even, I guess, is PCI DSS. So DSS has everything to do with account data security. And as you can imagine, an MPoC does have a lot of account data. So it does have PIN and does have account data. So that's a no-brainer. So, but it is important to note that your backend environments, for instance, the payment processing environment, optionally a remote kernel environment, and also the attestation monitoring environment, The first two should have PCI DSS certification. Attestation monitoring is a little bit different. So if it doesn't have any account data, then of course it doesn't need to go through a DSS certification, but some other requirements in the MPoC standard apply in that case. Finally, of course, if the solution, if the software, no, basically if the MPoC solution supports PIN, then the backend part needs to be compliant with PCI PIN. So this is just to give an idea that MPoC is not just a couple of easy requirements, but there is a lot behind it, actually. What's also important to note is that MPoC is still young, relatively young, I would say. So the first version was released in November 2022. The current version is from last year, February, so that's a year now. And it's still in development. There is a lot of clarification needed. So FAQs are issued quite regularly, and you can find them on the PCI website. And that's why I wanted to highlight this, because the FAQs are integral part of the standard itself. So it's not just that you think, okay, there are FAQs, but I just understand everything, so I don't need it. It's good to have a look at them because they are important. And it's good to check this page regularly because, like I said, the FAQs are issued quite regularly. Yes. So another thing that's important to note is that the standard has security requirements and test requirements. Security requirements are basically a high-level description of what needs to be done, and it includes also an objective, as you can see here. So this is basically more or less a copy-paste from the standard itself. And the test requirements describe what the labs, the MPoC labs needs to do actually. So here you see on the right side that the tester must confirm through examination, etc., that the security requirement is fulfilled basically. If you as a vendor only focus on the security requirement, you miss something. You miss information that a lab is going to look at. And especially this requirement is, you can see that the security requirements is kind of high level. I mean, an inventory can be anything, can be in any format, can contain any information. But the test requirement is much more specific, and that's where we are looking at as an MPoC lab. So it's very important for the preparation of an evaluation that you really have a look at the test requirements and not just look at the security requirements. Also not just look at the objective, although PCI claims that the MPoC standard is more objective based. So there are more ways to implement some goals. Still, the test requirements are quite prescriptive, not that prescriptive anymore as we used to have in SPOC and CPOC, but still. But the main part here is that there is a difference between security requirements and test requirements. And it's important to have a look at the test requirements during the preparation before the evaluation. Another important aspect is, like Anton also said, it's not just kind of tick boxing, I would say. So there are a couple of testing methods defined, and each test requirements basically has one or more of these testing methods in it. So, and there are 4. So examination is basically documentation review, source code review, etc. Testing is actually testing. You cannot say more about that. Observation, it looks very much like testing, but it's more kind of just seeing what the product is doing, basically. So when you enter a pin, so actually what's happening. It's very similar to testing. So the idea of this slide is not just to explain the differences, but it's just to make clear that we are not just doing documentation review. So it's also testing, it's also pen testing, it's also source code review, and it's even also interviewing. So as a lab, we are obliged for some requirements to do an interview with MPoC vendor employees just to get an idea of procedures and processes in the organization. Because MPoC is not just hardcore technical requirements, it's also about procedural requirements, processes, work instructions, and risk management even. So all these kind of things, you need to write down what you have, but in an interview, we also kind of test whether these kind of procedures are actually implemented in the organization. So it's quite something altogether. Next slide, Dario. Yeah, so the certification life cycle is also important to say something about it, because often it's that when you are certified, then that's the end of the story, basically. But that's not true for MPoC. It's not true for any PCI standard, actually. So basically, once you are certified, the certification is valid for 3 years. But you need to go through an annual checkpoint every year. So in this figure shows the process for the first annual checkpoint. So the annual checkpoint is indeed 1 year after the first, the publication date of this, the certification. So you will be reminded by PCI 19 days upfront that the expiry needs to go through an annual evaluation. And this annual evaluation is not the full evaluation that we are doing in the beginning. So it's a kind of, it's different, it's smaller, of course. It's just, it checks whether the operational procedures are still in place. For instance, it checks whether your DSS certifications are still valid. It also checks against maybe some new attacks that have been emerged in the past year. So it's still a serious evaluation, but it's not as big as a full evaluation. So also you need to go to the same lab that you did the first evaluation with to do the annual checkpoint. And basically we need to write a report again, and we have to submit it basically before the annual checkpoint date. If we do it after, it's not really a problem, because the listing is still valid on the PCI website, but it will be marked as orange. So it has a first expiry indicator, as they call it. But still, products can still be used. Even after another 90 days, the product on the website will be listed as red, but it will be still listed. So still some time to submit a report, but actually, of course, it's to be avoided. If you don't submit an MPoC annual checkpoint report after 180 days after the annual checkpoint, the product will be removed from the PCI website, so then it cannot be used anymore. If you still want to use it and get listed again, you need to go through a full evaluation again. So that's good to keep in mind. So key takeaways, MPoC standard is evolving, so it's new, and there are some, well, it's just evolving. So there are new developments, there are new clarifications added. So it's good to keep track of the PCI website of the latest versions. Test requirements are very important, because that's basically the requirements the MPoC lab is looking at during the evaluation. We don't just do documentation review, so it's also real testing, it's interviewing, pen testing, source code review, etc. So we really try to break the solution, basically, like Anton also explained, to get to some attack costing framework score. So that's also included in the evaluation. And then, of course, certification is not the end. So you need to go through annual checkpoints, and after 3 years, you need to go through a full evaluation again.
Thank you, Arno. More interaction. Let's see another poll coming on your screen pretty soon. We would like to know your feedback regarding what is your current timeline for launching a PCI MPoC-certified solution. Please select the options that apply to you. We see incoming votes. Okay, let's see the results. Let's close the poll. Okay, interesting. Arno, do you want to comment the results?
Yeah, so the most is within the next 6 months, which is quite soon, I would say, because the certification process itself already takes, it depends on what kind of product you want to certify, of course. A complete solution will take up to 3-4 months even, because there will also be kind of feedback from PCI, feedback from us as a lab to the vendor. We always find some things that needs to be fixed. So then time flies, I would say. So within the next month is not, well, launching is a certified product is not so realistic unless you are already involved in evaluation. So yeah, that's what I can say about it.
Hey, thanks.
Good. Well, then we are in the process with some of our customers in evaluation process, of course, and we learned already quite something on the way. And we thought it good to highlight some important things that we already see that require attention. So the first one is about random number generation. If you do the MPoC software or an MPoC solution evaluation. So basically, what PCI states that if you don't use a true random number generator itself, you should have your own deterministic random number generation functionality, and that needs seeding. And seeding needs to come from trusted external source and from trusted source on the device. And trusted external source is normally something like an HSM. But the interesting thing is here that the trusted source on the device itself is not Java secure random as is often used, basically. So that's not a trusted source to obtain seeds for the DRNC. So what are trusted sources then? So PCI wants you to get these sources from the sensors, for instance. So the motion detection or all these kind of sensors that can be used as input for as seeding, basically. The other thing is that is about cipher suits. So what you see often in a web browser, web server configuration is that the TLS configuration is done mainly on the backend. So it's because that's in control of a server. So there also, of course, the client can do some configuration on allowed algorithms and and so on. But normally it's done on the server side. But in MPoC, the idea is, okay, the MPoC software itself, so not only the software on the device, but also the software or the software running on the device, like SDK and app, should also limit the usage of insecure algorithms. So in MPoC, there is an Appendix C, which defines basically the algorithms that can be used in a solution or in MPoC software. And basically, the requirement is that the MPoC SDK or MPoC app already needs to confine the configuration in such a way that only these secure algorithms can be used. So that's also something that we see in practice going wrong. The third thing is that there should be minimum continuous checks. So basically, there is some requirements about some checks, like routing or checking on developer mode, should be done real time, basically, on a continuous basis. So it's not just sufficient to do it once. Before a transaction, some things really need to be done continuously. So that's also important to note. Then the final two things are related to PIN. So the first thing I want to say is that the PIN block, so the PIN block that must be supported is ISO 4. And that means that you need to use AES because all the other PIN blocks in the world only support triple DES, and obviously that's not allowed anymore in MPoC. So ISO 4 is mandatory, but ISO 4 supports PIN digits from 4 till 12. So in general, you see often PIN codes of 4 only, but since ISO 4 supports PIN blocks up to 12 digits, it also needs to be supported in your MPoC application or SDK. So that's good to understand. So it's not just that the standard is supporting it, but you really have to support it in your MPoC software as well. So that's one thing. The other important thing is PIN entry. So like Anton also explained, so a smartphone is not designed to be as secure as a regular POS terminal. So there are all kind of side channels, like again the sensor side channels that can be used to extract PIN possibly. So a static PIN pad is not sufficient to use. Also, a completely randomized PIN pad in which the PIN keys are changing over the PIN pad is not mandatory. And the reason is that it's kind of difficult to enter your PIN if the PIN keys are moving around over the PIN pad itself. So it's not so user-friendly. So it's not required, but it is more secure against side channel attacks. A third way that's possible, it's a kind of in between. So it's not a static PIN pad. It's also not a completely randomized PIN pad, but it's a PIN pad that's moving around the screen of the device. So this helps to avoid leakage of pins through side channel attacks, basically. Whether the shuffling of the position of the PIN pad is actually secure depends on the implementation, because you can imagine it depends on how much this shuffling is taking place. So this is something that an MPoC lab is actually testing. Okay, so far, so these are what we see important things that go wrong at this moment. So it's good to take an advantage of this knowledge.
You have seen during the presentation that the MPoC certification shouldn't be underestimate. There are many requirements, technical requirements, but also procedural requirements. Documentation is needed, and there are also dependencies with other PCI standards. We have also seen that the cost of attack matters, so it's really important to gain enough points to show that your SoftPOS application is robust enough against attacks, and we have seen that scalability matters, really matters. Reducing the scalability of an attack could allow you to earn quickly 25 points needed to be certified. We have also seen that testing is pivotal for the PCI certification because there are quite a few testing requirements for each security requirements. It's also important to be continuously compliant with the standard and to maintain the PCI certification. The PCI certification typically lasts for 3 years, but you have annual checkpoints that your SoftPOS apps need to meet to maintain the certification. And at last but not least, we have seen we saw some typical pitfalls during the certification process, like for instance, algorithms that don't generate random numbers as they are supposed to do, or side channel attacks to disclose the PIN entries and so on. So thank you for attending the webinar. Thank you to our speakers, Anton and Arno. And now let's open the Q&A section, because during the webinar, I saw quite a few questions, very interesting questions coming from the audience. So let's start with the first one. How can we avoid fake SoftPOS applications? I think that this is a question for Anton. What do you think?
So that's a good question, and there is more depth to it than you can see on the face value. So it is relatively easy, and a lot of technology exists to understand if you are talking to the real server or you are talking to a fake server. But in the other direction, it's not so easy at all. And this is why we at Guardsquare, we are actually busy with implementing client-side protection, man-at-the-end protection, and we have a very extensive suite of client-side protections that you can apply to make sure that fake applications are not possible, or that it's extremely hard to create them. But in reality, of course, you have to combine the client-side protection methods and also server-side checks in order to have this process of mutual authentication, making sure that the application is talking to the real server, the server is talking to the real application, and that the whole system is untampered with and safe to work with. And once you've made sure, then you can execute the payment transaction. So if I would condense this to one sentence, I think this is an interesting topic to chat about later. Please feel free to contact Guardsquare, and we promise you a very interesting conversation on the subject.
Thank you, Anton. I see also quite a few questions regarding a very relevant topic. I think that this question is for you, Arno. I pick one of them, and the question is, if we are integrating a certified SDK in our SoftPOS app, do we still need to send the MPoC, the SoftPOS app to a lab for the certification of the whole SoftPOS solution?
The short answer is yes. And I can explain why, because an MPoC app always needs to work in combination with an MPoC solution. So the solution needs to be certified. As an MPoC app can integrate an already certified SDK. But there are some requirements regarding the integration of the SDK into the application. And if you know the standard a bit, so that's domain 2 that's involved there. So we didn't discuss this today, but there are some requirements about integration of an SDK into an application, and this also needs to be assessed by an MPoC lab.
Okay, thank you, Arno, for your answer. I see another question, quite specific one. Maybe you, Anton, you can answer to this. It seems that the attack costing framework in MPoC is a very specific table, deviating from the GIL ratings. Can you explain why?
So it will be also interesting to get your opinion on this. As I see, the spirit of the two rating systems is more or less the same, right? So you have very correctly established the parallel here in your question. So indeed, they look at various at the complexity of executing an attack or planning an attack. So there is also identification and execution of the attack that's being rated. However, in PCI MPoC, the scores and the scoring system reflects the nature of the device that we are dealing with. So the attack space is primarily software, and the threats also come primarily from software because that's such an extendable programmable system. So the scoring system is designed around that fact, while the GIL scores are more designed for hardware tampering, and there are a lot of hardware aspects to it. What's your take, Anna?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, basically, GIL was the basis to start this attack costing framework methodology in MPoC, but it has been tailored for mobile devices, basically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I see another interesting question, and I think this one is for you. The question is related to biometric identification and the MPoC. So with biometric, you don't need any PIN. So does the MPoC is MPoC needed for such a mobile payment scenario?
Yeah.
And how the lab, how will the lab manage the evaluation of this scenario?
It's a good question. So basically, there are two questions here. So the first one is that MPoC does not support this yet, biometric stuff. So it has, so like Anton explained, it's modular. So there will be some other modules included later, including biometrics controls and requirements for that. But the current standard doesn't support it. The second question I see is basically whether MPoC is mandated or something. So that's done basically by the schemes. So basically, the schemes say, well, you should go for an MPoC evaluation certification. So it's not that PCI itself is mandating this. So the actual mandates is coming from the schemes.
Okay, thank you. I think that we have still time for a few questions. Maybe this one is an ironic question, but it's worth answering. The question is the MPoC purpose not to allow mobile app developers to make cool things for payment fast? So, Anton, what do you think?
I think that's the answer that may surprise you, but I think that the answer is yes. So the goal of a security standard is actually to allow developers to make cool things for payment fast. That is exactly the goal. And the perception, the common perception and the irony in your question comes from the fact that people think like, oh, security, this is such a pain, like we are going to do like a lot of additional things. But this is actually going to save you a lot of time in the future, because every security incident, believe me, it's going to take much more time than all the testings and requirement designs that you are going to spend your time on productively. during the development of the product. So it definitely allows you to roll out a solution faster, and not only a solution, but a solution that your customers will be happy with and will thank you for. So so the answer is yes, it is to allow us to roll out cool things to the market and make progress together.
Yeah, maybe the question was also because I mentioned something about a couple of months for evaluation process, and that's also true. So it's not just 1 week and then you go, and that's also because MPoC is complex and it's very important to do very good security testing, basically, because in the end, the speed is nice, but security is also very important.
Okay, maybe the last question, or maybe also we have time for also for others. The question is another, I would say, ironic question is, will international payment systems and card networks update their SDKs to comply with the PCI requirements, or will all the protection requirements lie on the vendor shoulders?
To my knowledge, not only will they have updated, so the payment SDKs from Visa and MasterCard are known to be very secure, and indeed some of the burden, I guess, as you integrate those SDKs will go away. But as Arno also explained to you in one of the previous questions, this is not going to solve the problem completely, right? You still have to certify the full solution, but of course, relying on proven and verified SDKs is going to make your life easier. What's your take, Arno? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. Basically, it's so MPoC is developed from CPoC and SPoC, so you see, you know, evolution basically. So so the idea is to make it easier to do evaluations, but still it should also be secure. So it's I think this whole evaluation process will never go away. So that's for sure.
Okay, I think thanks a lot, Arno and Anton, for the presentation, and thank you for attending the webinar. We can now wrap up. If you have further questions, you can reach out to us, and after the webinar, we will send you the recording. Thank you very much.